Hey guys, Scott back here again with you with kind of a new what is style beer video with what I do many times, a beer dissection on the tail end of after explaining the style of beer with you. What we're going to talk about today is what is English Strong Ale, and also what I have today is one of my favorite styles of English Strong Ale is from Lake Placid Brewing Company. Okay, is UBU Ale. Those of you who have been up there, this has been their kind of signature beer. About 25 years ago, I guess, they started brewing it. I probably was up there late 90s, 2000, and it's called UBU Ale, and it is an example of an English strong ale. And when I remember being up there in the late 90s, 2000, I'm like, what's UBU? UBU was actually a dog of one of their patrons, and I guess he had an affinity for beer, and they called it UBU Ale. So it's UBU. Obviously, I'll put a graphic up there, but it's a tremendous beer. I have it, every time I go up there. One thing to notice, or one thing I learned about that beer is a lot of the restaurants and pubs in the area will also have it on tap, is if you have it in the draft, like a regular draft at the bar, and then you get it in the cans, the can version is slightly different than at the brewery. I got some information because I noticed when I was up there last year, it just tasted different in the can. I wanted to bring some home. It turns out that in the can they have another, I'll say facility, subcontracted brewing, whatever. They have the recipe, they make the beer. Still phenomenal beer in the can. It just had a little different taste and flavor to it. It wasn't the malty profile wasn't as intense. So, but I do recommend, whether you can get it at the brewery or you can buy the cans. The cans it's phenomenal, the cans. It just tasted slightly different. And being the beer geek that I am, I kind of noticed and I inquired about it. And because, listen, I'm a home brewer, I realize just subtle differences can change the beer. I'm sure when they brew it actually in Lake Placid versus a different facility, there could be just a slight change in the flavor, but both are excellent beers. It's the same beer, but obviously just subtle differences to it. So what is English Strong Ale? English Strong Ale has been around roughly 200 years, 1700s in England, and I'm sure Scotland, it usually falls under English, Scottish Strong Ales. It's in the category of what they call old ales or stock ales. And what was left for the English strong ale or the stock ale was the first runnings. Now, what that means is when the brewer takes the grains and they mash the grains and they get that thick, syrupy fluid, we call it wort, and we draw it, we call it lautering. We draw the fluid off of the grain bed. That first runnings they would use for the old ale or the stock ale because it was always a higher strength in alcohol percentage. The one that was the second runnings, they would kind of lauter and run water through the grain bed again and get another syrup, but it wasn't as thick and dense and concentrated. They would make the brown ales that way. At least that's what the history books are telling me as I've learned about this style for the last few years. What to expect? This is in the family of bitters. British bitters, there's an ordinary bitter, a best bitter, and a strong bitter. And it's really varying levels of alcoholic strength and bitterness level. And then at the very high end of it is usually your barley wines or your English barley wines. The English strong ale kind of falls somewhere between those bitters and the barley wine. I should notice, even though it said bitters, and a lot of times those are cask conditioned, even supposedly in England to this day, that they'll use the term bitters when it's coming off of a draft system, or sometimes it's through a beer engine or sparkler that gives a nice frothy head. When they bottle it, they'll usually call it the pale ale. So it's not like in the United States our Sierra Nevada pale ale, but it's in that family of beers. But this strong ale will sit somewhere between a barley wine at the very high end and the bitters or the pale ale at the lower end of bitterness as well as ABV. Now the alcohol percentage for this style based upon the BJCP, which is the Beer Judge Certification Program, is about 5.5% to 8% alcohol. The one I have today, the UBU Ale, is about 7%. Here it is again. Okay. And this is in a crowler, by the way. This is about 32 ounces of beer here. The bitterness of UBU Ale here is about 45 IBUs. The style is somewhere between 30 to 60 IBUs. So you can see it's already sitting within the style range if style matters to you. UBU Ale, this English strong bitter, is ranked, I think it was around 30th in the Beer Advocate rating system. So even though it's not a BJCP style of beer, it's ranked pretty high along the class of English strong ale. Lake Placid Brewing Company, sometimes I misspeak. It's technically Lake Placid Pub and Brewery. I call it just Brewing Company just for the ease of saying that versus saying Pub and Brewery. But a lot of their beers have had awards. So if you check their website or you just kind of Google them, you'll get a lot of it. And Big Slide Brewery, which if you've watched, this is filming my second Lake Placid Brewery beer video. So if you're interested in their beers, either other ones are posted right now, depending on when you're viewing this, or they're about to be posted over the next week or two. So again, UBU Ale has been around for a while. It does fall under this English strong ale. So what are we going to expect from this? This beer is typically like an amber to kind of a dark reddish color beer. It's going to be malt driven, which what that means is we're going to get a lot of malt, like toffee, nutty, dried fruits, kind of anything that would derive malt, caramel, toffee, like I said, dark toast type of flavors. Again, sometimes dark fruit, a little bit light caramel, not as much as, say, a Scotch ale would be or a wee heavy caramel, but you're going to get kind of that malt-driven thing. Hops are not going to be as important here. They're going to probably have some hops to balance out that perceived sweetness or bitterness a little bit. But again, it's not going to be a hop-forward beer like your IPA, so we're probably not going to get much of that. But again, caramel, maybe a light chocolate. Like I said, amber. You're going to get some esters. English yeast strains will produce some esters, like some fruity esters. Sometimes you'll even get some diacetyl, which is like kind of a buttery flavor smell, like think of popcorn butter at the movie theater. So sometimes you'll get that, but you don't want that too high anyway. That's not desirable. The mouth feels going to be pretty full. The way they brew typically English strong ales, and I don't know the mash temperatures, but the higher the mash temperature, around 156, 158, the alpha amylase, which is an enzyme, is going to bite off a bigger chunk of the carbohydrate, and some of it's not going to be fermentable. Some of it's going to add to the mouthfeel as you drink it, versus when they mash it at like 148, there's beta amylase, which takes off little chunks of the carbohydrate, so the yeasts are able to act on those a little bit better. So the moral of the story is that this is going to have a fuller mouthfeel than a lot of other beers, because of probably brewing method. Now, again, I don't speak to the brewers at Lake Placid Brewing Company, so they may or may not use that technique. Classically in the style, besides the Pilsner malt, the probably some chocolate malt, crystal malt, they may use some flaked oats or wheat or barley like that, classically for the style. So that's pretty much all I have as far as history is concerned. But again, we have this Lake Placid Brewing Company or Pub and Brewery, UBU Ale, named after their dog up there. This is a nice treat for me. I got about 6 crowlers from them, had them sent down, and UBU Ale is something that I drink pretty regularly up there. I mean, they have a lot of great beers at that brewery, and Big Slide, again, their sister brewery, but this is the one I always seem to gravitate to. All right, so a little bit about English strong ale. So let's open this up. While I'm opening it up, there's other styles that you may be able to find in the store that are more commercial. Fuller's 1845 is a English strong ale. Samuel Smith's Winter Warmer is another English strong ale along the style. Trying to think if there's any others that I can't think of right now. You see things like Winter Warmer, things like that, because they're all typically pretty high alcoholic strength. They're not as high as barley wines that are usually 8 to 12%. These are going to be somewhere usually about 5.5 to 8%. Most of them that I've seen are closer to 8%. Again, it's just maybe the American way that we just always put a little more alcohol in our beers as well as hop them a little bit stronger. Okay, so let me pour this. Since it's a crowler, it's pretty full, so I'm going to just still continue to pour this off camera so I don't have it all over the place. And as I say that, and again, this is not nitrogenated, but I'm also getting a nice little cascading effect. I'm going to try to show it to you. So if you can kind of see almost like a cascading effect, I'm pretty certain it's not nitrogenated. Usually when they do the crowlers, they can't nitrogen, you put it in, the nitrogen in the crowler. At least that's what's been said to me. But you can see we got a nice, now it's more dense, more because of my pouring, okay, because I've been aggressively pouring things a lot these days. But a nice beigey, white, frothy head, very supportive. I have it in my kind of, tulip pint glass, my, smaller tulip pint glass. You can see we have that reddish, kind of hue. It looks, because I got sunlight coming over my shoulder, looks more red on that picture, but it's reddish, amber, medium copper kind of color. Okay, and that's pretty traditional for this style. So already things are looking good for this, my UBU ale, okay? So let's take a whiff. So yeah, you definitely are noticing that you're gonna get this malt dominance here. There's some esters. You definitely get like a toffee, a lightly roasted like nut, hazelnut, pinole type of nut. Slight like, you get that dark fruit, like kind of like a rum soaked kind of raisin. Not as strong as your Belgian dark strongs, your Chimay blue caps and Belgian quads. It's not like that intensity, but it's just some, herbal, floral aroma, probably from the hops, but definitely not dominating the caramel, toasty, nutty aroma that we're getting, again, from a malt-driven beer. So let's take a drink of this. Oh, yeah. That's nice. So again, the toffee, deep, dark bread crust, the nuts, lightly dark fruit with the esters. Again, maybe like a raisin, like I said, not so much rum soaked, a little bit alcoholic warmth here because we are sitting around, what did I say, about 8%, 7%, I think there's that 7%, I'm sorry. But still 7% is kind of right at that window that I usually start getting a little bit of warmth. So there's a little bit of warmth there. Medium mouthfeel. And then as you let it kind of roll back your tongue, you still get hit with that toffee, nutty kind of flavor. Definitely medium bodied, definitely more, but not as the mouthfeel of a barley wine, like if you had a Sierra Nevada, Bigfoot, or Anchor Old Foghorn, or something like that. Really no astringency, which is good, because that would kind of give you that bite. But definitely malt forward. I always get a feeling when I drink this beer that I'm actually sitting in some Irish, British pub. Because you know what? You have good carbonation. You always think of cask conditioned ales and some of the English beers being served a little bit warmer, maybe less carbonated. And, when you're drinking this, it seems to epitomize, an English strong ale. Like, the strong ale is just coming from the alcoholic percentage. But, there's enough carbonation there to kind of give you a little refreshing hit. But then it kind of settles out and you kind of have that nice, soothing, almost like you're drinking like a liqueur or something down your throat. You don't get that alcoholic bite of a liqueur, but you'll have that nice warm caramel toffee type of flavor going off the back of your palate and the back of your throat. So, things like this, with a lot of my beers, I give food pairings and things like that just because, part of the Cicerone studying and things, we try to learn about this. And, I would probably serve this with traditional, English, Scottish fare, your fish and chips, with the batter, the batter and coating. A nice caramelization there will kind of go well with this beer. This has enough carbonation to kind of cleanse your palate and cut through, any of the fattiness from that. If you had shepherd's pie or, my family was my grandmother and my grandfather was from Scotland, and my grandmother was French Canadian, and she would make these meat pies. I think they're technically called Scotch pies, but they were kind of like, sometimes there was lamb in there and beef and pork they would use. It was like a pie, looked like a pie, like an apple pie, but with meat in there. And, so this I think would go good with that. This would overpower a lot of light seafood dishes like your shrimps and your whitefishes. I would probably pair it with something a little bit more robust, like your shepherd's pie or your meat pies or Scotch pies or fish and chips, lamb dishes, maybe some gamey meats, maybe even deer, venison, some beef, stew dishes, maybe a brisket, slow cooked brisket in a crock pot, in the nice gravy. So I think this beer would really complement that very well. And again, if not, like I do with most of my beers, pour it in the glass and just enjoy it watching football or whatever you like to do, watch a movie. Because I usually like to kind of take the beer in. Sometimes don't want the food to distract too much. So whatever you want to do. But it can pair very well with some dishes, as I mentioned. So again, Lake Placid Brewery UBU Ale is the beer dissection today. It is a English strong ale. That was what the what is. So if you don't know much about that, and again, some commercials are Fuller's 1845. Fuller's makes a lot of English bitters. I think it's Fuller's ESB Extra Special Bitter. I haven't done a video specifically on bitters, and so remember, this is a stronger version of the ordinary best and strong bitter categories, but not as high as barley wine. Kind of sits in there. Classically, at least 200 years ago, it was the first runnings of the mash. And one other thing I should mention too is when they used to brew it, like porter style beers, they would put them in casks. And the 200 years ago, this style of beer would have a little more acidity to it. It would have they'd probably get some lactobacillus in there. The Brettanomyces, which brings in that barnyard horse blanket type of flavors. I perceive it as like a cherry flavor. So again, similar to porters and other beers, English style beers, what you're drinking today at maybe Samuel Smith's Winter Welcome or Fuller's 1845 or UBU Ale, you're not going to get that character, which I would prefer not to have it right now in these styles, especially with the UBU Ale here. But you would get some wood character also, but it would definitely be different than the wood character you may get at a Goose Island bourbon stout, oak-aged bourbon stout. So anyway, guys, hopefully a little information about English strong ale. I'm just gonna take one more sip here. There's one last thing. But again, malt-driven, not much hops, amber, reddish, caramel, toffee are gonna hit you. If you like beers like that, this is definitely something you need to check out, especially if you're up in Lake Placid. That's kind of my home away from home, that town. And Lake Placid Brewery, I'm going to have a couple other beers of theirs that are sitting in my refrigerator to review over the next week or so, and then probably get another shipment and continue to do that. So anyway, guys, have a great day, and until next time, I will see you then. Take care.